he is the Director, Learning Futures and Lead Education Architect. In addition to this role, Michael is President of the Australasian Council on Open Distance and E-Learning. He specializes in emerging technologies, technology-enhanced learning, curriculum. Shall I repeat, sir? Okay. Curriculum renewable, e-learning quality, multimodal design, digital, visual, and multi-literacies. Michael has worked in higher education for more than 30 years at 5 universities and is particularly interested in how constructively aligned and aesthetically enhanced learning environments can better transmit concepts to students, particularly those from diverse backgrounds and those who study at a distance. It's not an easy thing to rethinking assessment, particularly if you are not trained to think about assessment in different ways. Or what you have been doing for a quite while still seems to work okay, but contemporary higher education has been quietly shifting the goalposts on assessment for a number of years now across most disciplines and for a range of good reasons. Not the least of these reasons include academic integrity, preparing students for the world of work, and the push to provide themselves as emerging professionals. In many cases, the shift has involved the advent of new technologies that provide options for staff and online students that just did not exist in the past. So, in this backdrop, his session on the topic Rethinking Assessment Post-COVID, Authentic, Collaborative, and Active becomes pertinent. This presentation will highlight a range of approaches to assessment that have been used for decades in traditional classrooms. But post-COVID, we now look at them through a new set of glasses that highlight their value in the virtual classroom. The aim is to stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before, learn from them, and not consigning what they did to the history books, because we now teach online. So not taking much time, I invite Professor Michael Senki from Charles Darwin University, Australia, to start his session. Sir.
Thank you so much. And it is a real pleasure to be with you again. I think I was with you a couple of years ago, and it's a joy to be joining you again. And thank you so much for the invitation. Yes, COVID has brought many things to our shores, your shores and our shores. And it has caused quite a rethink in the way we deal with students, particularly having to deal with them in the online space very quickly in many cases. First of all, though, I am speaking to you from the land of the Larrakia people. Australia is made up of a number of different Indigenous or First Nations peoples' lands before the Westerners got here. And I'm speaking to you from the Larrakia land and do want to pay respects to elders past and present of those people. Here is where we are, right up the top there of Australia. So when I spoke to you 2 years ago, I was down here in Brisbane, but now I'm up here in Darwin, and it's quite a lovely time of the year up here. It's our dry season up here in Darwin. We have a wet season and a dry season. It is a tropical climate here, and quite different to the southern parts of Australia. So where this line goes through about here is the Tropic of Capricorn, and above here is all quite tropical. And it's a lovely time of the year up here, where it's getting very cold down south in Melbourne and Tasmania, etc. I'm originally from down here in Melbourne, though. So I've come quite a bit of a way up, as I've been slowly working my way up the country. So what I am going to cover, as was highlighted in the abstract just before, is a necessity, I think, and what we're seeing here in Australia at least, and in many other countries, is the necessity to rethink assessment in the light of what's happened over the last few years. Now, this has caused many universities to consider different forms of online engagement. They've used proctoring softwares, and they've used to do exams and things like that, things that they had only done or only just started to experiment a few years ago, but now many have moved into that space very quickly. We do think that also that the goalposts around assessment have been changing quite rapidly because of the advent of technologies, particularly around the thoughts of academic integrity. That is, cheating behaviours and students being able to buy assignments and to get essays written for them, to be able to use artificial intelligence engines to answer essay questions, to answer quizzes, as opposed to authentic assessment approaches that we might take. The other thing that's happened, particularly in Australia, and I think the UK and America more particularly as well, has been this notion that higher education is establishing somebody for the world of work, not just educating them for their greater good, but it is actually there for getting a good paid job. And so there has been a lot of emphasis placed on this notion of preparing students for the world of work, understanding that they are on a journey from school through to the workforce, and they come to university for a period of 4, 3, 4, maybe 5 years in the middle there. And yet, for some reason, we take this middle space and make it quite different to either what's happened before or what they're going into. And so there's been a lot of thought given to how we make what we do at university more authentic, more collaborative, and more engaging, and more like what people will experience in the workforce. Now, of course, that changes a number of things. That changes the way we deliver education, the types of systems we'll use to do that. And it also changes the way in which we assess. Because if we're thinking about authentic assessment, we're thinking about it being similar to the types of things people would do in the workforce. Now, I'll come back to that thought a bit later on, but that's just to set the scene. Now, partly this has occurred because technology has advanced so rapidly over the last 10 years or so. I first started teaching online 21 years ago, and in a very early system of Blackboard 4. We thought at the time we'd created some very good online pedagogies, but that was 21 years ago. Now, the pedagogies we established back then are not necessarily the good pedagogies that we want to see now in our online teaching, or any teaching for that matter. So these contemporary technologies and the suite of technologies that we have allowed us to reinvigorate and look at different forms of assessment. Not just different forms of assessment, but assessments that happened in the past in the classroom that we can now do online because the technologies are allowing us to do it, where previously the technologies didn't allow it, and so we used much simpler forms of assessment. And so we're going to look at some of these as we go through and understand, I hope to some degree, that what was old can be new again. So here's a scenario. Now, this is partly based around me in real life, but it's slightly changed. When I was an undergrad student, in my very long time ago now, I was a visual arts student. And I was, after finishing college, I did pretty well at college. I initially became a sessional lecturer, or casual teacher in arts and photography. I specialised in photography, the photographic arts, and in screen printing and things. So I then became a sessional lecturer, a casual lecturer. I then became a lecturer, an academic, a lecturer, and that was good. Thing was, typically, I taught in the way that I was taught. That is, most students seem to think that was going okay, and I thought it was going okay. And I typically taught in what's known as a mastery model. That was stand up and deliver. And that was my approach in what we called the studio teaching. So when I taught photography, I taught the way I'd been taught 10, 15 years before that. But things changed quite considerably. Not only had at that point that was the technologies of photography changing, but also we were starting to see a lot more technology being used. I was then asked to do more of my teaching online. And because I was starting to take teaching more seriously, it was then suggested to me by my superior that I needed to teach online and to use some different methods online. And I heard from some of my colleagues who were instructional designers and more experienced teachers that I had to consider this thing called constructive alignment. Now, I had no idea what constructive alignment was. Well, it is, of course, how we align our learning outcomes to our assessment so that what we're assessing is actually assessing what we are saying we are going to assess and in our courses, in our units. But I didn't really understand that. I mean, I mostly inherited the curriculum that I was teaching. And so this was a revelation to me that I had to be teaching to the learning outcomes that were given to me and accredited as being what I had to teach. At some point then, I needed or wanted to apply to be a senior lecturer. And to do that, I needed to be explicit. I needed to be very clear about what my teaching methodology was, my pedagogical approach, how I taught, why I taught. But I didn't fully understand what that meant, particularly as we'd moved to more blended modes of delivery. What was this thing called pedagogy? And was that a single thing or was it multiple things? So it is, of course, and as you know, the interaction between teachers and students, and now, of course, the learning environments, whether that's a physical learning environment or a virtual learning environment. And it's the learning tasks that we do in and around that environment and why we do the tasks in the way we do. And that's called, in very simple terms, pedagogy. If I was to say, for example, we're using a pedagogical approach nowadays, or when I was teaching 21 years ago, we were talking about this notion of constructivism, how we help students construct their own knowledge by being exposed to a range of different scenarios, constructivism, how students construct knowledge. And so that was fine. I could talk through that. Of course, there are other things, other different pedagogies, of course. In reality, though, I was using a much broader approach than just constructivism. And we use different approaches as the needs arise. And I'll talk through some of those in just a sec. So I have, many of us have, developed out of necessity a very eclectic approach to pedagogy, fact, pedagogy is a very loose term nowadays. It means a whole lot of things. And so we tend to use that word very loosely. I kind of liken my teaching approach now to playing golf. So I like playing golf. In fact, up here in Darwin, where I live, my house backs onto a little lake, and on the other side of that lake is a golf course. And the lake is actually a trap for people. So lots of people hit their balls into the lake that I live behind. Anyway, so I know if I go and play golf on that course that the first hole that I come to is about 260 meters long. And so I know that I'm going to start, the first club I'm going to choose is my 2 wood. And if I hit that well, I'm going to get a good 180 meters, 190 meters down the fairway. I then know I'm probably going to use my 6 iron, take that out of my bag and get my 6 iron to get it up onto the green. And then if I'm lucky, I get to use my putter before I knock another club to pitch it back up onto the green. The next hole, though, is 180 meters, not 260 meters, it's 180 meters. And so I have to use a different combination of clubs. Now that's very similar, if you let me stretch this analogy a little bit, very similar to teaching in that there are first-year students, and I might have a class of third-year students or postgrad students. And so I have to use different combinations of teaching methods to actually teach these students, because they don't all learn in the same way. They learn at different levels. And so some of my teaching has to be at a simpler level, some of it has to be at a far more complex level. What I do get to do, though, in every situation of my teaching is I get to use assessment. Regardless of what teaching method I use, and one would argue that assessment, of course, is part of teaching, but I get to use my putter. And I see assessment as the putter, or finishing off the hole before I get on to the next one. And that will, of course, be a number of different assessment items throughout a different semester or teaching period, term, whatever you call it. So I have my clubs. And in my case, these are my clubs for a round of technology-enhanced learning, because most of the teaching I do now is all about technology-enhanced learning. In fact, that's my discipline area, is technology-enhanced learning now. I moved on from the arts many years ago. I then started teaching web design and publishing, and then instructional design and things like that. So when I was teaching online, that was actually an instructional design and online design and the design of websites for teaching. So I've developed over the years my set of clubs, which include a range of learning strategies. So pedagogies, as you like. So there is this notion of pedagogy, which is really a cover-all term for teaching nowadays. But then we have this notion of andragogy. Now, andragogy, of course, has been a concept for 20, 30 years now. And that's where learning is more self-directed and more directed at adults than at children. So not necessarily andragogy in the K to 12 sector, but very much post K-12. We also have this notion of hudagogy, which probably came in 15, 16 years ago, which is more around the self-determined learning, where learning becomes far more autonomous, that we're giving our learners a lot more ability to not just recite information, but to create new information. And nowadays, I think we're starting to expand that even further around the notion of paragogy. So these are the OGs, the paragogies. Which is about the peer production of concepts and contexts, the self-directed learning, co-construction of learning, and particularly in the online space, where students can work together to construct new knowledge together through different tools, through different environments. So these are what we call our learning strategies. And of course, there is assessment associated with that. Around those learning strategies, around those pedagogies are a range of learning theories. Now, I did mention constructivism before, how we construct knowledge and meaning from experiences that we have. But we started to evolve out to more socio-constructivism when we started to introduce things like discussion forums, and we started to get people to work together more in a more social way. And so we evolved to this socio-constructivism. Constructivism is still there, but we added these extra elements of socio-constructivism, or the theories, how we have talked about it, how we've understood learning and teaching to be these things. There's also, of course, situated learning, which is all about getting students to acquire professional skills that are tangible and participating and leading. And so in particularly focused around a situation, whether they're going to be a manager or whether they're going to be an engineer, and it's very situated in work-based learning and things like that. And then, of course, the Siemens notion of connectivism, where we're really seeing people connect in this online environment to what we see in the pedagogy side of the fence, or the co-creation of learning. And we now have systems that make that really easy to do that. So there's other learning theories that we associate with the different pedagogies we use. And at various times and various ways, I'll use different elements of those tools depending on the groups that I'm teaching. I did mention that we do have, of course, this notion of assessment, and there is not just designing assessment of learning, but it's the designing assessment for learning and as learning. So assessment isn't just about testing knowledge, it's also about creating new knowledge and helping our students create this new knowledge and then give that back to us as an element of their learning. And of course, associated with that assessment is this notion that assessment can be more active. It could be collaborative. And of course, particularly if we're thinking about preparing students for the workforce, more authentic. And so we commonly engage our teaching strategies to make these things more active, collaborative, and authentic. So let me talk now briefly about how these contemporary technologies help us do that. So we do have at the centre, in most cases, this is consistently true across, well, particularly Australia. All our universities in Australia would have these tools and systems. Similar in the UK and the US and many other countries, Europe. So students, we do have what we call our student curriculum and our student management systems. That is, the systems in which we place all that important information about the curriculum and the subjects they're going to study as part of that curriculum. And we have a system to mediate the students' enrolments, the student management system. Now these, and that's where their grades go, and that's where they pay their fees and all those things. And so these systems sit at the centre of this ecology of tools that then make it possible for the other tools we put around it to get the information they need for a consistent approach for our students. We then, of course, have what we call our traditional learning management system, whether that be Moodle, Blackboard, Canvas, Desire to Learn, or something else. There are lots of different learning management systems. In our particular case, we use a Blackboard system. I have used Moodle in the past. I've used Canvas in the past. So, but as a learning management system, that place in which we mediate learning for our students and try and give them some scaffolding towards that learning. Interestingly, over recent years, we've evolved to the use of what we would call productivity and communication tools. That is, tools like Microsoft Teams, and the Microsoft Office 365, like Google, and a range of tools that help students work together in different ways than they would in the learning management system. The learning management system is a fairly closed environment, where something like a productivity tool like Microsoft Teams, like Google Shared Docs and things like that are very collaborative. And companies, businesses use these tools, particularly things like, and increasingly tools like Microsoft Teams, Slack, Trello, tools like that to help their workers work together to achieve their outcomes. And so there's this thought that we should be using more of those tools as we start to prepare people for the workplace. You see, in Australia at least, they use Microsoft and Microsoft Teams in schools, and they use it in the workplace. But for many years, we haven't used it very well in our university studies. So they come after 12 years of studies having used these tools. We then stick them into this thing called a learning management system for a while, and then they go back to using the tools they were using before. And all of a sudden, we've set up this almost a contrived space for them to help them to kind of contain their learning. But it's not what they're going to be working on in the workplace. And so we need to be considering also introducing this notion of productivity for our students. Isn't that an interesting thought? That a student could be productive. They're not just empty vessels waiting to be filled. They are actually potentially productive people, even from the day one of their studies. So they can be coming up with solutions to problems that could be in the real world. And so we need to make it possible for them to experience that and to work together to tease those things out. You could say it could be done in a discussion forum in a learning management system, but that is a fairly locked in space, where something like a productivity tool, which is far more social in nature, being able to, and I'll show you a picture of one in a sec, allows students to be much freer. I won't labour that point too much longer, but we then have, of course, our content management systems, those things that hold our copyrighted materials, our production materials, things like that, that we need to keep a track of and control of, and that we can serve to a number of other systems. Of course, we do have our lecture capture tools for recording our lectures and media streaming tools. We use Kaltura for this, which is a particularly nice tool interacting with our Blackboard system. And so our lecturers can capture their lectures. We prefer them to capture them in shorter, sharper, more focused chunks rather than just recording a lecture. And then we allow and we get them to work that around concepts. That's another whole story in itself, which I'm not going to go into at the moment. But we use our media streaming tools. Of course, we also have e-portfolio tools and tools that help our students evidence their learning and how they can make that evidence clear to other people. So they're called evidence rendering tools. We, of course, have tools like we're using now. Zoom, the Microsoft Teams environment has a system, and we use Blackboard Collaborate. A number of different tools we have because they have different features. And so this virtual conferencing, of course, really took off during COVID, and all our classes were done over Zoom or over Microsoft Teams or Collaborate, as with most universities around the globe. We're using Zoom and or tools similar to that, Google Hangouts, things like that, to teach their students. And we've really seen a rise in that now, and particularly how we look towards blending these approaches now so that our face-to-face students, as people are now starting to come back to the classes, our face-to-face students and our virtual students working together more in these virtual conferencing softwares. So we're seeing a lot more of that kind of hybridized learning space. Of course, all these, what we would call core systems in our system, all have data associated with them, data that allow us to understand if students have been active and to mediate that and to help our lecturers understand if they need to get in touch with the student because they haven't been engaging for a couple of weeks, to understand if they need some help. And so we have data across our systems, which we mediate back into dashboards and to help our lecturers understand how their students are progressing. Very important. But we have these other tools out here, these cloud-based tools that we don't necessarily get good data from. And so we sometimes get some data from them, but we don't get a lot of data. And so we have our social media platforms, of course, our Twitters, our Facebooks, our Snapchats, a whole range of different social media, WhatsApp and WeChat, and all these different social media tools and platforms that students use to communicate with each other. And of course, we sometimes use as well to communicate with our students. But of course, we can't get the data from those. So it's not as useful to us as they are to the students. And of course, we have a whole range of different web applications, particularly associated now with our mobile devices, but also our computers, or a whole range of different educational tools that we can use. Now, Microsoft, of course, which we use, has a whole range of different apps within its ecology to help us do that, quizzing apps and brainstorming apps and all kinds of things. I'm just going to take a little drink of water quickly. Of course, we've over the years, there's been a huge emphasis on the sustainability goals and making ourselves more open and sharing knowledge. And of course, OERs, open education resources, play a really important part in that. Some countries have been better at that than Australia has, I'd have to say. We haven't done enough of that yet. And I'm particularly passionate about open resources, and most of my publications are published in open journals. And so the sharing of knowledge and the way we can bring open knowledge and share and recreate knowledge is really important part of the way we make higher education sustainable in the future. Okay, moving on a bit further here, we then talk about what we'd call third-party content, streaming service, things like YouTube, TED Talks, Vimeo, a whole range of different sites that hold expert knowledge and some not so expert knowledge. So we do encourage people to use those sites that are more rigorous in terms of their vetting of content. Professional identity tools like LinkedIn, etc., those type of tools that allow our students to represent themselves to potential employers. And then, of course, academic integrity tools like Turnitin and a whole range of other tools that can be used to check for cheating, and also those tools that are used to help students write and to get their grammar right and things like that. Particularly important for those institutions that have many different nationalities involved. So I think at CDU, we have something like 100 different nationalities studying with us. And so very important, and of course, a lot of those don't have English as a first language. So a lot of pressure on those students to get their grammar right. And so there are tools to help them, but also, of course, there's extra pressure around buying assignments and things like that. So we need to be very careful of that. So in our particular, that diagram, which was a general diagram, for us works out like this. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of this particular diagram as the writing is very small, but we have tools around assessment, we have tools around mobile services, we have tools for content and creating content, we have academic integrity tools, we have collaboration tools, we have third-party content that publishers create, and our supporting services, and of course our data and analytics. Now they are, and in all those cases, they're the tools that we use in our context at Charles Darwin University. It will be different in your case, it'll be different, a different combination of tools in most universities' cases, that is just our little picture of our ecology of learning tools. Now, I did say I was going to come back and show you a picture of a productivity tool. So this is Microsoft Teams. You may be familiar with it. I don't know if you use Microsoft Teams, but you see here a very social nature of this. So unlike a discussion forum that is all contained within drop-downs, it's a stream of information like Facebook, like Instagram, like Twitter, like Snapchat. It's a stream of information and it's a searchable information, but you can break over here on the left-hand side. Right on the left-hand side, these are some of the teams I'm involved in. A project team here, a learning steering group, and this is in the work context here, the digital learning design team. And within these teams, there are channels and topics and things like that. And all within those is a stream of information, being able to share, being able to like, being able to share GIFs and fun things as well. So at the top here, of course, you can have you can link to files and to notebooks and to wikis and to all kinds of things. So there's a whole range of different options. It would not surprise me, and I'm not saying it's going to happen straight away, but it would not surprise me that these tools become far more important in the future than the LMS. If the LMS providers do not change the way in which they don't fundamentally change the way in which they provide their product, it is more likely that we will start to use these productivity tools more than we will our learning management systems. However, and this is not a small thing, we are increasingly aware of the use of artificial intelligence in learning and teaching. So should universities be worried about this increased use of AI? We can use AI for good, or we can use it for evil. The World Economic Forum, and so the answer to that question is yes and no. So we can use it for good and we can use it for evil, but don't panic is the trick here. We can't panic about this because there are tools out there that will help students write their assignment. In fact, that article here, this article explained a situation where a lecturer had gone to an AI engine, put in his exam into the AI engine, and the AI engine answered all the questions in the exam 100% correct. No human intervention. The machine answered the questions correctly. And so those students who are aware, those students who have a lot of money, can get their exam questions answered for them by a machine and pass their course. This is a frightening thing, of course. There are also writing assistance tools that will write an essay for someone. A friend of mine went to an AI engine to write a poem for him, and he typed in 7 keywords, 7 concepts that he wanted to talk about in the poem. The AI engine wrote the poem for him, and it was a brilliant poem with many, many stanzas. So the question is, if a student used one of these writing assistance tools and the system wrote 49% of the work and the student wrote 51% of the work, is that still considered an original piece of work by the student? There are tools we already have to do this. We use a tool called Grammarly. It helps our students understand their grammar and things like that. If a student puts in an assignment in bad grammar, it will correct the grammar for him, and majority, quite a large portion of that assignment, of that written piece, may not be his or her original words. Other cloud writing tools with automated text generation, extraction, prediction, there are mining, there's form filling tools, there's paraphrasing tools, there's translation tools and transcription tools, all of which can be used to help our students do their work. The question is, to what extent do we do that? Now, if we are going to ask our students to write essays and do quizzes, things that have things that might have been done time and time again by students, or where there is clearly knowledge found on the internet to answer those questions, we can expect our students to use these tools. We don't want them to use them. We can't prove that they've used them in many cases, but they do use them, and they're there for them to use. So, knowledge banks, there are heaps of knowledge banks out there to help with revision, identifying gaps, targeting the pre-production sets of material, pre-produced sets of materials, all of which through the internet, we can have access to. And so quizzes are not necessarily the answer, essays are not necessarily the answer, and reports aren't necessarily the answer, things that can be generated in that way. So we need to, they're important, of course, but we can't fully rely on them in the future. We need to actually have more authentic, more collaborative forms of assessment that help our students not want to go and cheat. We need to change our exam questions every year. We need to tailor them to get students to be able to relate to their own personal experiences. We need to be really, really interested in this space because it's not going away. And if we do ignore it, it will overrun us. We cannot, and I repeat, cannot hide our head in the sand and pretend it's not there. It is there, and we've got to be serious about it. AI is in every element of life. It is there in education, skills and learning. It is there in innovation. It is there in data science. It's in every aspect of life. Artificial intelligence now has a role. We have to be aware of it. We can't be scared of it because we'd run away. We have to face it, and we have to find ways in which, particularly for our education purposes, we can get students to create knowledge answers themselves, not based on the thing that could be generated for them. So here is, I use Instagram. I love taking photos. Remember, I used to teach photography, and so I use Instagram. This assignment maker writer was an ad that came up on my Instagram, and it took me to this site here. So this picture here came up on my Instagram offering, because obviously the AI knows I work at a university or I'm associated with a university. And so it thought, well, this guy might be interested in having some assignments written for him. So an ad appeared on my Instagram feed, taking me to this assignment solution network site. So cheating versus authentic assessment. At our university, we block. There are 1,281 sites associated with fraud and contract cheating that we block from students being able to get to at our university. Of course, they can get to them from home, but we block them from being able to hit those sites from our university computers or on our wireless network. 84% of those sites were provided to us by our quality regulator, TEXA, the Tertiary Education Quality Standards Agency, which is the Australian Quality Agency. They've given us the names of these cheating sites, and we've been able to block them. That's only about 84%, and we have another 16 that we've found otherwise. It's one thing to say that we need to change assessment to be more authentic, but we also need to be able to back it up in a consistent way. And unfortunately, in many cases, that does mean we have to pay somebody to help us do that. It does take longer to design more authentic assessment, but not that much longer. And it doesn't actually take that much longer to market either. But what it is really important for us to understand is what I've been trying to tell you here. It's us having that meta understanding, that larger understanding of what's happening out there, so that we can actually start to address it. So we need that meta understanding of how, so we know how to teach better. And that means we can't just do it in our own thinking. We need to work with others to help us. We need assessment mentors and people like that who have an understanding of better different types of assessment to work with us to get these new types of assessment happening. So as we said, we blocked these sites. In March of this year, even though we blocked these sites, we had 7,533 hits trying to get to those sites. 7,333, and they're just from our university computers. In October last year, we had almost 10,000 people, 10,000 hits on these sites trying to get to these cheating sites. That's an astonishing figure. Are our students cheating? Clearly, there's an interest in cheating. Whether they're cheating or not, we don't know. We can't always prove it. We do prove some cases, but there's certainly an intention to want to cheat if they are going to these cheating sites. So we need to investigate. So here I had to do a review of a graduate certificate in higher education for another group, not my group, but another group. And they have 4 units of study in their graduate certificate. And you'll see here that across the 4 subjects, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 essays. This is for a graduate certificate in higher education. This is a course that is teaching people how to teach. So it's a course that's taken by discipline academics. So it's taken by chemists, biologists, engineers, accountants, business people, and it's trying to teach them how to teach. And we're getting them to write essays as though that's the best way to teach people how to teach. And reports. Now, reports are okay, but it's really easy to cheat in an essay. It's really easy to cheat in an essay. What we do have, though, is they get to set up an e-portfolio. They get to do some blog posts. They get to do a presentation, another presentation. They get to do a summary of their posts they've done over there, and they also get to do a teaching plan. But my wife, who's got a PhD in psychology, in her psychology program, her undergraduate psychology program that went for 4 years, she did between 50 and 60 essays in that 4 years. 50 and 60 essays she did over the 4 years of study. She has never written an essay since. An astonishing thing that she is taught how to write essays and never has to write another essay. And so is that authentic assessment? Yes, essays are good for helping us to process information, to understand, to dig deep, but do we have to use them so regularly, particularly when they're not authentic to where our students are going? All right, so what does that mean we have to do? It means we have to think through what other types of assessment we could use. We can use the human voice, get people to speak more, to speak their answers out. Viva voce, so oral exams, things like that. Images, getting them to create imagery. More collaboration, more peer review, more poster and infographics. Excuse me. More e-portfolio and reflection work, more work-integrated learning. Now, I've got a whole range of things here, and I'm going to not deal with all of them. It'd be far too much to deal with all these. I'm going to take a deep dive into some of these just to give you an example of what I'm talking about. I recently wrote an article about this in the Journal of University Teaching and Learning Practice, which can be, it's been downloaded so far 264 times, which is quite a delight. It's only been out for just over a month. But that's in the Jolter journal I just brought out a month or so ago. Now, so this is creating an online social media advertisement on the topic of your learning. So whatever you're teaching, getting our students to create a social media advertisement. So on the right-hand side here, we have Sangeeta, who works in our learning support team, and excuse me, she did a advertisement for some PD she was running and talking about that, and put it up on our Yammer site. Now, this wasn't an assessment piece, it's just an example of what I mean. So most students today, of course, use social media platforms, whether, a whole range of different social media platforms. And so they're familiar with seeing ads. They're put before them all the time. And so by students creating an image, if I was to put an ad on Instagram, for example, I'd create a really nice image and put some text around that, put a link in it to take me somewhere. We can get our students to create an image of a concept that they're working with. We can post it into a safe institutional space, whether it be in Microsoft Teams or Yammer, could be a closed Facebook site, it could be on our ePortfolio system, or even into a discussion forum where other students can view it or like it and comment on it and give feedback on it. So that's get them to start thinking in terms of how they would promote a different concept. A good tool for doing something like this is VoiceThread. I don't know if you have heard of VoiceThread, but it's a nice tool where images or videos can be put up and you can use your voice to respond to different activities. And so give a verbal explanation. So you don't only just get the student to put up the social media ad, but you get them to explain what they're doing about the social media, why they did that, getting them to process why they did it. Another one is an online brainstorming. So in the old days, we used to sit in a classroom and use sticky notes and put them up on the wall to do brainstorming. Of course, there are now a whole lot of systems we can use to do that with in our online space. So we used to do it. We couldn't do it in the online space, but now we can. So we can easily be doing this in things like OneNote and Padlet. The university I work at has a university-wide Padlet license. And so they can share documents. You could do it on Google, but you need a space that people can interact in at the same time. They can do it in smaller groups or even individually, put it up in their own time asynchronously. They can do it synchronously or asynchronously in these tools. And so it's exactly the same as I said. It's like sticking sticky notes on a wall in a classroom, but it's online. And so they can brainstorm concepts. Key here is to then synthesize those ideas and getting the students. So the students might have put up 30, 40 ideas on this sticky wall. It's then up to them to synthesize those ideas and give a summary of those ideas. And it could be around a concept that you want to teach them. So then it's presented as an outcome of the brainstorming activity, which students can reflect on. So here's an example of Padlet, where we've used it in our Ed Strategy team, and people have started to put up different concepts as sticky notes, but of course they can use images as well. So it's not just, it's enhanced because it's technology. They can use images as well as the text, and they can put up QR codes and they can put up internet links. And so it's far more user-friendly in a sense than the sticky note on the wall. But then I'd get my students to summarize what's on this page, and they would then process that information and maybe go to the links and read some more. And so they would be able to create some understanding around the ideas that have been put there. We could ask our students to do a description of a process, a flow of how something might work in a business or what might happen in a classroom, and then have to explain that or present that as to a novice. So this can be done again synchronously or asynchronously. If we do it live, you could use Zoom or Teams or Collaborate and have students present their ideas. It could be recorded if you need to. They could do it on their phones, in fact. It doesn't have to be done on a computer, it could be done on their phones and recorded in their LMS or into Teams or some kind of media streaming platform where other students can get to it and potentially make notes and debate. VoiceThread, as I mentioned, was a tool that we could do that in. It's a great tool for this type of thing because you can use your voice as well, don't just have to use typing. The voice is harder to emulate. I mean, there are voice AI engines out there, but they're not as sophisticated as the writing engines yet. They will be, but trick here is to ask our students, getting other students to ask questions. So it's not just a student putting something up and everybody being quiet. It's actually promoting the notion that students have to respond and ask questions of the students as though they're a novice, to try and tease out some of the unexplored concepts. So it's a bit of role play. It adds an element of fun to this activity. Next one is kind of getting our students to create mind maps or infographics, helping them to process ideas and represent them in different ways. So infographics are all the rage now. You see them everywhere on the internet. Students are exposed to these in all walks of life. And so the trick here is to get them to praise the information, to praise the ideas. Again, this can be accompanied by some kind of description or a verbal description, an auditory description, either in writing or audio explanation. It could be simply created in PowerPoint or Word or a more sophisticated tool. And of course, it could be posted onto the forum, the web forum, or VoiceThread or Teams, whatever the tool you would like to use or have access to. And of course, they could be pre-recorded and loaded up as well. And that kind of thing actually makes for really good peer review activity as well. So getting students to peer review that other students' work. So if a student puts up a work, 2 other students have to peer review it and comment on it. And of course, they are not just learning by doing it themselves, but they're also learning from the other student who's written that around that same topic. And all of a sudden, they've got 3 different perspectives on that particular topic, as has the student who has submitted, has to review 2 others as well. Same as what we do with our academic papers. We peer review and we come to learn things from other people in the experiments they're doing. So a very simple example of a problem-based learning model, which is an infographic of a problem-based learning model. Okay, so getting near the end here, we want to write a letter and get them to write a letter or an email to a friend about what they've learned in the week. So they've done a week's learning. They then have to write a letter to a friend explaining what they did that week and what they learned in that week. And so they do that. Pen pals used to be a thing. I used to write all the time to my cousin in New Zealand. And it was very common. We used to write backwards and forwards explaining things that we'd done in that previous week. But it's not so much now a thing. So, but it is a thing to get students to summarize their learning for the week, as though they're explaining it to an old friend or a cousin or whatever. Alternatively, they could make a 5 to 10 minute audio explanation of what they did in the week. It doesn't have to be written. It could be an audio explanation. In fact, in some ways, that's even more authentic because as though they're sitting in a coffee shop with a friend and are talking to their friend about what they've done during the week. And it could be done using their phone even. So initially, until they get the idea, you could actually help scaffold that for them, give them some examples, do one yourself even, and put it up there as an example of what you mean. Some of these things need to be exemplified for them to understand till they get the idea of what they're doing. So there are many types of tools that we could use to do this. Could be a blog site, could be an e-portfolio tool, could be just written in Word and posted up as an assignment. But really, you don't want to share that personal anecdote thing. It's a bit different to other examples. You don't want them to get embarrassed that they may not have learned enough of what they should have learned. So it's probably not a great idea to share that too widely with other students. It's probably more a case of like a pen pal, where it can be a bit more personal. It's about their personal reflections on the week and things like that. So you don't want that to be exposed too much to other students. It's really more something to be read by the lecturer, the teacher. You could get them to write a poem or a play or a dialogue between 2 people. So asking students to act something out, whether it be in a physical sense or just to write it out. Something like a play, particularly if it's in a written sense, where they're they would pose it from the perspective of different actors. If you're in the boardroom, so you get them, if you're teaching business, for example, you get the discussion between the chief finance officer and the head of HR and the head of IT, and they're having a discussion about a topic, and you're getting them student to put themselves in that situation of those each individuals to write about that as though they would a play. They could do, if we think Snapchat or Instagram story or Facebook story, you could do it as a video as well. The art of creating a dialogue or concept around a particular topic from different angles is so important. Get them to walk in the shoes of somebody else that they would deal with in a work situation. Writing a poem or an acrostic that helped them to process that information in different ways. Again, that could be done in an e-portfolio or a blog tool or a journaling tool, something like that. If it was designed as a play, a group of students could do it. They could do it over Zoom or Teams. They could practice it and so forth. I am coming to near the end here, and I did want to point out to the fact that it is today is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And so this is a day across the globe, we think about accessibility. That is how people with different abilities can access what we do, whether they're blind, whether they're dumb, whether they have autism, things like that. There are things we can do in our online environments that can help these people learn who don't have the ability to learn in more traditional ways. And so one of the key things around accessibility, particularly from an online perspective or online learning perspective, is the use of universal design for learning. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there are a number of very good websites out there explaining what universal design for learning is. And it does revolve around a number of different concepts, around different ways to engage, different ways to represent information, and different ways in which people can action things and express things in the online space. And so there's a whole range. I'm not going to go into great detail here because I am running out of time, but I do want us to be aware of this concept of UDL and how we create content that can be consumed by many different people. And so it might be as simple as putting some alternative text against an image. It might be when you're using something like Microsoft Teams or Zoom that you have transcriptions on, when you place an image online, that it's associated with some text that the screen reader can read to understand what's in the image. There's a whole range of different suggestions and tools that can help us do that, particularly to help the notion of comprehension. So I won't dwell too much on that. I'd just like to say that most of our tools that we use nowadays in contemporary higher education are web accessible, and most of the companies do make these tools to be compliant with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the WCAG. So in our particular case, we are compliant at level 2 WCAG, and also a whole range of different guidelines that we have to follow. So that's a good thing, that we don't have to do too much. The tools themselves are compliant, but we have to be aware that the content we put up there is also compliant. So this brings me towards the close now. And what I'd like to just say is two heads are better than one. So part of my role at the university is to host a number of different departments, one of which is a learning design department. And we have people who are experts in different forms of assessment, whose their job is to understand assessment, to work with our teaching staff to help them understand different ways of assessment, more authentic, more collaborative, more authentic forms of assessment. So educational designers are a great source of inspiration for academic staff. peers, your peers are a great source of inspiration. When was the last time you spoke to one of your peers about assessment? Have a conversation with them. Talk through what could be done different ways. Or if you heard of something that, instead of writing an essay, what else could I do? Just have a chat with them. There is also this notion of partnership pedagogy, that as students have an interest in this as well. It's not just about staff. It's not the staff-student divide. It should be the staff-student coming together to actually co-create knowledge. And all I'd do is implore that we be open to new ideas. That's all. Open to new ideas, that we can start to think about things a little bit differently, and that we can look back and think, okay, well, back in the day, 20 years ago, we used to do this in the classroom. Could I do that now in the online space? And if I could, what would that look like? So my final word here is we are now realizing that what was conceived as being good online teaching is now being challenged by some of the newer, more student-centered approaches to learning and teaching. Not the least of these being due to the technologies that we've evolved to allow us to be way more collaborative. And it is this notion of collaboration, which is exactly what they'll be doing in the workforce. And we need to be able to create environments where our students can collaborate to be more authentic when they get into the workforce. That's it. That's my talk. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Professor Senki, for an enlightening keynote address. Before we proceed further, there are a few questions from the audience, and the first question is, what do you think artificial intelligence is an actual evaluation of a student's intelligence, or we really require face-to-face evaluation for an impartial evaluation?
Well, this is a perennial question, particularly as we move to online exams. At our own university, we have online exams. We've moved away from face-to-face exams, and many teachers are saying, no, we need to go back to face-to-face exams, not do the online exams. In many senses, I would say, yes, if you're going to do exams, then yes, they probably should be done face-to-face. However, I would say, think of something else than an exam. Why do an exam? We've in Australia, we hear our lecturers say, but our professional bodies require there be an exam. Well, if you test that notion, that is not always the case. It is in some cases, and there is a place for exams, but we have been far too reliant on exams for many years. And there are other forms of assessment that are far more authentic than an exam. How many people do an exam in the workplace? Not many. So we have to think about ways in which assessing our students as they would be working, not as we think this is an easy thing to do. To write an exam, exams are pretty easy to run. We write a series of multiple choice questions. We know what the answer is. We put a couple of other questions in there that might trick them a bit, and yet that's not authentic. That's just testing the that's just regurgitating knowledge, getting them to memorize things and to put answers. What we want them to do, what we want is them to create knowledge, to create new knowledge, not to just to regurgitate old knowledge.
Okay, so thank you, Professor Senki. Second question is, in your university, what are the top 3 assessment techniques which are being used currently?
So the top 3 techniques that are used, which I don't agree, so the top 3 techniques are essays, exams, and quizzes. That's the top 3, or reports, but that's not the top 3 we want to see. So what we are seeing is the rise in these different forms of assessments that I've been talking about. So we are seeing a rise in work integrated learning. So students going out and doing work for people. We see a lot more collaborative work being done. So students working together to create answers to problems and creating new answers. So we can quite often set a question or problem that the lecturer doesn't even know the answer to and ask the students to try and solve it. This is what we talk about when we're starting to create new knowledge. It's not just regurgitating old knowledge, it's actually creating new knowledge. What we like to see is far more oral assessment, so far more use of the spoken word in assessments than has been traditionally the case. If we think about exams and we think about being more authentic in the exam space, we can think about running an online exam and then associating that with an oral assessment as well. So then getting the students to some set questions that the lecturer knows to actually test their knowledge around what they've answered. So if they answer differently to what they've answered in the online questionnaire, we know there's a problem. So we can see a lot. We are seeing a lot more of oral assessments happening in conjunction with online assessments.
Okay, thank you so much. One more question is, can digitization or artificial intelligence or use of technology in assessment and evaluation cater to social and emotional aspects of a student personality? If yes, how?
Depends how sophisticated the artificial intelligence engine is. And there are many sophisticated ones. And so what we see, particularly if the instrument has been trained by the person who's using it, particularly in terms of keystrokes and the way they type, the way they speak, you can train the artificial intelligence engines quite happily. We know that, for example, voice-to-text software has increased its usability exponentially over the last few years. And so we see nuances in artificial intelligence that we haven't seen before. So we see personality, in a sense, we're almost seeing personalities coming through in artificial intelligences because the artificial intelligence engine has learnt the characteristics of that person. And so, yes, they can mimic people's personalities. That's not a personality, it's a mimic of a personality. And so these elements need to be considered. And so we need to, as we design assessment, this is where we want to get them into new areas, to be more personal in how they have to respond to questions, not just give us back the information we've given them in a different form. So if we give them lots of readings, chapters to read, and then ask them to process that information and give it back to us in an essay, that is a very easy thing for an artificial intelligence engine to do. But if we get them to apply that knowledge to a different scenario, if we get them to not regurgitate back that knowledge, but to use that knowledge to create a different scenario, that's what the artificial intelligence engines can't do yet.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your wonderful answers. So it was really an enlightening keynote address. I hope everyone is forced to think about rethinking assessment, especially in post-COVID times. So the key takeaways from today's session are that we need to design assessment as per the assessment of learning, assessment for learning, and assessment as learning. Assessment is not only for testing knowledge, but it should be for creating knowledge. And for that, teaching strategies must be active, collaborative, and authentic to make students more socially useful and productive. So thank you so much. I thank you and congratulate you for making an illuminating and wonderful keynote address as well as handling the queries of the participants. I am also thankful to the participants for attending the session attentively and asking questions and making the session interactive. Thank you one and all. Now I request Professor Adit Gupta to take charge of the next session. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Michael, for connecting today and making the presentation so meaningful. Great to connect with you once again and hope to do that in future as well. Do take care of yourself.
Thank you, Professor Gupta. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so dear participants, there is one announcement for you. We are waiting for the confirmation from the next speaker, and as soon as we'll come to know about that, we'll apprise you. Till that time, please wait. Wait for 5 or 10 minutes, right? Thank you.
Uh, so, friends, we are still waiting for confirmation from our keynote address because they've just been stuck in a meeting. And if they arrive in time, we'll take things forward. But until we have the start of lunchtime, we could have a small interaction with all of you because you've heard people, since morning they have been interacting on this particular theme. We would, like to have your experience as to how you feel that the whole process of online learning and teaching took place, and what would, in your opinion, would be the right assessment technique that you would have, thought for yourself, just for the purpose of background, that we had been using 2-3 different types of assessments. One was an open book examination where an assignment based question was given to the students, which had a certain aspect of practicable applicability, and based on that the students had to write their questions. The second aspect was conducting an online quiz, and the third was submitting assignments on the basis of the questions that were given to the students. We could first start with our participants from other universities who have joined us today. So we have somebody maybe from the IIT or somebody from the Central University of Jammu today to share with us how these assessments took place in their universities, and then we'll also request some of the students and research scholars from Maya College of Education to share their experiences also in terms of how assessment took place. So if we could have a mic circulated for the students, we could start this interaction. Hand mic. So we would, like you to please share people from delegates from outside universities who are participating. We would love to have them first speak first. If you could introduce yourself and your institution, and if you could just share with us what kind of online assessments did you have in your university? And this session is also open to people who have joined online. So if we could have the session, a view of the online participants also put up on the screen, and they could just unmute themselves and share their experience. So we could first start with the people who are in the audience. Ma'am, any of you? Yes. Yeah. So if you could just tell us your name and from which institution you are.
Hello.
Yeah, just put it a little closer.
So, hi, my name is Shreya. I am a research scholar from IIT Jammu. Regarding assessment at IIT Jammu, so during 2020, I would say at a very initial stage of my PhD. So let me begin with how I was evaluated for my comprehensive work, and then I talk about how it was done for the UG students. For us, it is the BTech students basically. So for me, I gave my comprehensive exam sometime last semester basically. So it was an open book exam, but it was not that I could Google the questions. I had my system, I had my tablet, I had my phone, everything open. We all were given this option that because it was an open book exam, we could open the material. But honestly, there was no point opening anything. The questions were set in such a way that it was a very application-based exam. It was an open book exam in the true sense. And since we are also into one of the projects right now, which is revolving around Jammu, Kashmir, and Ladakh, what we've understood is open book exams not being implemented very properly. It's very believed that you just copy paste the answers, but that's not how it really goes. So that is how it went for the scholars. Now going ahead with the BTech students. So it was a very decentralized system, I would say. Every faculty, right from HSS, that is Humanities and Social Sciences, to various engineering streams, they took the exams in different ways based on how much practical component they had, how much theoretical component they had, and further how much lab work they had, how much mechanical workshops they had. Because some of the workshops were being conducted using the virtual labs. For the students from computer sciences, the programs were done through certain simulation softwares. And then from the HSS, for the HSS students, those who were particularly pursuing internships, so the things went completely online. Now I can give like one or two examples because again it was different for different faculty members. So for example, what one of the faculty members did was the questions were set through a programming software wherein the values would change automatically. So for example, if you have a numerical, not all the students would be getting the same numerical value in the question. The values would change depending on probably your roll number, probably your entry number, or probably just be shuffled randomly based on some programming system. So this was one way. Then there were case study based questions. There were open exams. Yes, there were MCQs too, but time bound MCQs. I would not say that we at IIT did not face any problem. That would be a very fluid way of putting up things. Of course, problems were there. Problems were there everywhere. Initially, we all were struggling. We all were trying to find out ways. But eventually, yeah, things did really get settled up. First, at a personal level, since I am also a TA for some of the courses, yes, I also have that preference for classroom mode exams. But again, I would not really say that online exams are not effective. They can be made effective, but for that, teachers really need to put in a lot of efforts. So that is how I would like to end it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this nice sharing of experience, and good to know that even tech-savvy institutions like IITs also face issues, especially when it comes to using technology-enabled assessment. We could have somebody from the Central University to share, their thoughts and experiences with us today. So anybody? Maybe we could ask them, from what institution are you, ma'am? Rajiv Gandhi College. Okay, so if you could just share some, ideas. If you just take off your mask for a particular moment and put the mic a little closer.
Hello everyone, I am Anita Sharma. I am a PhD scholar at the University. So I am now I'm working as an assistant professor at Rajiv Gandhi Memorial College of Education, Kathura, and like all other institutions, our students are also have faced the same problem. As I'm from B.Ed sector, trainings are also face a lot of problems. Like they have to do their PP and Viva home at that time, COVID. They are not sure about how to use Blackboard. We have to train them how to use whiteboard, why is that? There are a lot of problems students have faced. They don't have any idea how to create an artificial classroom from them. There are a lot of more problems. Like some students are complaining that my voice is not audible. How I can share my screen with them, how I can show some teaching aid, how I can make my class interactive. So there are a lot of sometimes in my personal experience at the 9 p.m. some of the students are upstairs on the rooftops and they are sharing their giving their vivas. So there are a lot of problems, but online assessment में students के साथ साथ teachers ने बहुत cooperate किया. Thank you universities के members ने जिन्होंने रात के 10-10, 11-11 बजे तक students के board exams पूरे conducted किए timely so that they can compile the result properly and on time, they can result go सके और administrative process start हो सके. So there are a lot of network issues, sir.
I know. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. Somebody else from that side? Huh? बोलिए.
I'm Priyanka from Dogra Degree College. So I'm the faculty from Dogra Degree
Yes.
College. So as a teacher, what we face the problem is that is the problem ki how we can take the exact path to the students on the right path so that they will not distract themselves from other social networking sites during online classes. Because they used to on their Zoom app, then after students were disappeared, used to call them, where are you, why you are not responding? So that kind of problems we face as our teachers, and during the time of exams also, during the time of evaluation also. So that kind of problems we face.
Okay. Thank you very much. So somebody from my College of Education would like to share. I think so. We have a student there.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Neeraj from MI department. And first of all, I would like to be very thankful to our principal, sir, HOD, and our staff members. We didn't face any difficulty during our online teaching learning process. There was only a little bit difficulty of our internet issues. Otherwise, this is the best college. This college has not wasted our time. There are no words to say about this college and principals, actually, sir, and staff members. This college is very, very good.
But we want to know your experiences in terms of difficulties, because from difficulties will arise solutions. And what challenges that you have faced during this particular time also need to be highlighted. It was only because a collective effort of everyone that we were able to succeed in these difficult times. But it is, we need to focus on what those exact challenges were, so that if next time we are faced with such an issue, we are able to, address that in a much better way, how we did it in the current, pandemic. So, if some challenges, if you would, throw, in this discussion. Yes.
Very good afternoon to all. I'm Sufyan from Central Institute.
Yes.
So basically, sir, जैसे हमारे कॉलेज के स्टूडेंट्स ने बताया कि इनको कोई ज्यादा प्रॉब्लम्स नहीं थी. आई थिंक ये लोग अर्बन एरिया के रहने वाले होंगे, मे बी इसलिए. मैं ग्लोबल बैकग्राउंड से बिलोंग करता हूँ. जी. तो हम लोगों को बहुत सारी प्रॉब्लम्स फेस करनी पड़ी, बेसिकली जो नेटवर्क इश्यूज होते हैं. जी. ओके, दैट्स गुड. आप लोगों को मायर कॉलेज में इतनी अपॉर्चुनिटीज मिली है. मेरी एक फ्रेंड थी मायर कॉलेज से, उन्होंने भी रिसेंटली एमआई कंप्लीट किया है, तो उन्होंने प्रॉब्लम्स शेयर की मेरे साथ. तो आई डोंट थिंक कि आपको प्रॉब्लम्स फेस नहीं करनी पड़ी होगी.
नहीं, बहुत करनी पड़ी. तभी मैं जानना चाहता हूँ कि कुछ उसी पे हाईलाइट हो तो हमें पता लग सके कि इश्यूज क्या हैं.
चैलेंजेस जो हम लोगों ने रूरल एरिया में फेस किए हैं, अर्बन एरिया में मुझे उतना नॉलेज नहीं है बिकॉज़ मैं रूरल एरिया में रहता हूँ. तो उस टाइम पे एक तो नेटवर्क इशू बहुत ज्यादा हुआ करते थे. जी. और क्या था कि अगर आप लोग मतलब पूरा दिन हमारी क्लासेस चलती रहती, मोबाइल फोन बार बार चार्ज करना पड़ता था. अगर लैपटॉप से पढ़ना है तो लैपटॉप को बार बार चार्ज करना पड़ता है. और नेटवर्क इशू का इतना प्रॉब्लम था कि हम लोगों को कभी कभी लेक्चर्स स्किप करने पड़ते थे बिकॉज प्रोफेसर्स की आवाज क्लियर नहीं आती थी. और असेसमेंट की बात की जाए तो हमारे असेसमेंट जो इवैल्यूएशन हुआ एमएड का, एक सेमेस्टर तो हमारा प्रमोशन हुआ, सेकंड सेमेस्टर, थर्ड और फोर्थ सेमेस्टर का इवैल्यूएशन हुआ. उसमें हमारे 3 स्टेप्स में इवैल्यूएशन हुआ था. फर्स्ट जो इवैल्यूएशन हुआ ओपन बुक एग्जामिनेशन, क्वेश्चन पेपर जो हमने रिसीव किया और ओपन बुक एग्जामिनेशन किया, और उसके बाद उसी में इंक्लूडेड थे हमारे एमसीक्यूज, राइट, जो कि हमारे प्रोफेसर ने इस तरीके से सेट किए थे कि हम लोग उनको गूगल ना कर पाए. तो वो तरीका था. और थर्ड मैं ऑनेस्टली बोल रहा हूँ, जैसे कि उन्होंने आपने भी शेयर किया, बिल्कुल. तो थर्ड ये था कि हमारा एग्जाम के बाद वाइवा हुआ करता था, उसी एग्जाम क्वेश्चन से रिलेटेड, ताकि जो स्टूडेंट्स ने लिखा हुआ है टीचर्स को क्वेश्चन पेपर पहुंच गया और आई थिंक कि टीचर्स ओपन भी करते थे हमारे पेपर से, पूछते थे कि हम लोगों ने लिखा क्या है। तो उस हिसाब से भी हमारा वैल्यूएशन हुआ और जो लिखा हुआ था हमने अगर उसी बेस पे हम लोगों ने अपने आंसर को दिया है। बिकॉज ऐसा भी होता है कि मैंने खुद भी लिखा है, अपना पर्सनल एक्सपीरियंस शेयर कर रहा हूँ कि हम लोगों को कभी ये पता नहीं होता था ऑनलाइन एजुकेशन में कि हम लिख क्या रहे हैं। लिख लिया और सबमिट कर दिया, हम लोगों को नहीं पता था कि पेपर जो हम लोगों ने दिया है वो भी किस सब्जेक्ट का है। और इवन कि एग्जाम के बाद भी मुझे मेरे कलीग मैसेज करते थे कि आज एग्जाम में क्या लिखा। सो दिस वाज द एक्सपीरियंस। चैलेंजेस तो रूरल एरिया में ही ज्यादा हुआ है, अर्बन एरिया में आई डोंट थिंक कि अगर ज्यादा हुए होंगे तो फेस किए होंगे स्टूडेंट्स ने। दैट्स ऑल।
थैंक यू। So challenges तो सब जगह हैं। एक प्रोफेसर माइकल सेंकी, he was telling you in his keynote that when they launched these online assessments, almost 10,000 hits went to cheating sites. So it is not just students in India who are having that issue, and so students in Australia also felt the need that since everybody thought assessment हम घर पे बैठ के कर रहे हैं, so that is the best way of giving an exam. So everybody, went to those cheating sites, and that is why the university servers and firewalls had to be created to block access to those sites. So challenges of network, even he said that accessibility, even in rural Australia, you don't have good internet connectivity. Even in rural America, you don't have good internet connectivity. So, this network issue is not only a problem in India, but even in well-developed countries also. And I can vouch that even students who were in rural, in these urban areas, they were also facing network issues because initially students did not have any Wi-Fi connections at home. They were connecting through their mobile phones. So connectivity on, and in earlier days when there was only 2G connectivity. So, attending those Google Meet classes and the Zoom classes on 2G connectivity was almost next to impossible. It could not be thought, but still, where there is a will, there is a way. Our students found that yes, by switching off their videos, they were able to remain connected for longer periods of time. They were able to attend those classes. The WhatsApp groups were highly made use of, and the teachers were able to share their learning material with the students. Students were able to respond back. So the ways were found to circumvent the situation, and that is the best thing that happened, that we stood up to the challenge, accepted that challenge, and also found out the right solutions. But what do you think? What I want to know is what would have been the ideal way of assessment? What do you think should have been done? Or this was apart from face-to-face examinations that we are back to now in online mode. What in your suggestion would be the best ways of conducting assessment? Right. Okay. So students are responding with that. Quizzes were one of the best ways. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Let's have the mic, please.
So as students, they are interested to go for the quizzes,
Yes.
whether it will be from Google Forms or from quizzes app. But they also have found some of the sideways how to respond on that Google Forms. They can Google sideways. They have two mobiles simultaneously with them.
Right.
On what they are writing the question and finding the answer. So for time bounding also, they also found that quizzes app sometimes can hold it.
Yes.
I have witnessed it, and you were able to do this kind of activity. No doubt, we have found other solutions as teachers.
Yes, but it is the job of students to circumvent the system and to find out alternate ways of answering questions. But
they are very smart,
I know.
so they do this kind of activities. But in open book examination, now the task is for teachers. Their
Yes.
question framing should be very practical.
That's right.
They should not be able to understand fully the questions. Like they need to search for what I am being asked. So that's my point. If you are going for open book questions or quizzes also, the question language needs to be brief.
Right.
Like what we are asking to them, that sometimes as teachers we keep it mediocre level. Okay, for few questions we are keeping difficulty at lower level, and for very less questions we are keeping at very high level.
Right.
So we need to differentiate here ourselves with the previous things, and we go for further. If online mode we have to conduct, then definitely there needs to be a lots of work done by the teachers.
Right. So here I'd just like to say that we're going a little futuristic. What we are planning to do in future is that every student will, attempt an assessment through his or her laptop and not through the phone in the coming future. And these the assignments that will be given or the open book questions that will be given to the students, they will have to be typed in MS Word. There will be no time limit for this. Like it is not going to be a 3-hour question. You will be given, say, starting 19th May 9 a.m. to 21st May 3 p.m. Till 2 days, you will be given time to type your question in MS Word and then submit your answer through a platform which checks for plagiarism, copying of references, similar words that are already been. Suppose if you copy a paragraph from internet and just put it in your answer, so that section will be highlighted, and if your paper that you submit is less than 10% plagiarized, then it will be submitted for further assessment. If your paper is more than 10% plagiarized, it will automatically be rejected by the AI system back to you. And then you will be given maybe just 2 hours time to revise the paper and resubmit. And if you are unable to resubmit, or if it is still highly plagiarized, then the system will keep on rejecting your paper till the time your paper, which is under 10%, is accepted for evaluation. So many new strategies are coming to avoid this cheating, and that. And as Professor Michael Senki was saying, that they have to the top 3 assessments for essays, quizzes, and what was the third one that he said? Any idea? Blogs or something, right? So that means essays. They were focusing on essays, right? So it, and then maybe the AI system only takes your oral viva voce, right? So there is no direct teacher involved. Whatever you are saying is recorded, and it will also pick noises if somebody is sitting next to you and he's saying, oh, okay, say this, say this, say this. So all those nuances will also be captured by the system. And since he said that there was no perfect, authentic system for assessment, everything is evolving and becoming better with time. So that way, systems will also keep on improving and becoming better with time. But cutting the whole matter short, that times are changing, and so the requirements of assessment and teaching learning process also need to change. And then he gave a very good example of the different types of pedagogies. There was pedagogy, andragogy, pedagogy, and all those concepts. So those need to be also understood, and how peer-to-peer learning process or teaching learning process should happen, and how we should develop life skills based assessment. So all these things need to be understood by the researchers and the practitioners today to implement in their system. Any other last minute suggestions from students who are sitting at the back and who are very enthusiastic in answering earlier? So if we could just ask them maybe one odd suggestion before we can close the session. Just after this, I'll complete.
So good afternoon, sir.
Yes, good afternoon.
Sir, my question is actually how these technologies have been special child.
How?
What special child?
I think we'll have to ask a special educator, to answer that. I am not a special educator, but I can say that there are assistive technologies, or there are technologies that adapt to what the deficiency of the learner is. And then, like for example, there are laptops which have braille-based keyboard. So if students who are visually impaired, they put their fingers on the keyboard and feel the braille characters on the keyboard, and using that braille characters, they are able to type their answers. And when I say assistive technologies, that means somebody is also there to assist them in that particular work. And similarly, for students with intellectual difficulty or students who have maybe hearing impairment. There could be an assistive device that helps them in understanding, or a good quality hearing aid which helps them listen to the teacher or the person. And it is not just questions and assessment which test their intellectual abilities, but it is also skill based. So maybe they have a dexterity test, or they have something to do with their own hands and create things, or put things in order. So there could be different levels of assessment or different tests for such kind of students. But I think so Dr. Ronika would be the right person to put a little more light on that. I'll request you to kindly share the mic with her, and she will also add something from her side about this whole assessment process, and then we'll come back to you for that last question that you wanted to answer. So we can just ask Dr. Ronika now.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a very pertinent question, that what are the assistive technologies we do have for the children with special needs. When we talk for the technologies, and when the child is working on a website, so there are accessible websites also. Majority of the organization, they are making use of websites which are accessible for the children with special needs, as well as for the persons with disabilities. Say, for example, if a person is not having both the arms or the hands are not working, orthopedic or a physically challenged, if we talk, there is a laser light cap which the person can put over their head, and with that laser light, they can access the screen. So similarly, if we talk about the special children, and particularly for the children with intellectual disabilities, we have a number of performance techniques. Though parents are supposed to be along with them whenever their assessment part is there. Thank you so much. I have, being a teacher, we are talking about assessment. Here, my challenge as a teacher is to evaluation. So whenever we talk for open book examination, though we frame the questions, all are application based. But majority of the students, they just simply cut, copy and paste the content. They have not replied whatsoever has been asked. So I request all the students that do first understand the question, what is asked. And as a teacher, we need to have rubrics, sir, for the essay type question. Because traditionally, we just see the length of the question and we simply mark it and give it marks. But it is very much important that for every assignment, we should have a rubric for that, so that we should do justice with our assessment. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I think so those students still had one last comment to make.
So may I say?
Yeah, if they don't want to say.
Anyone?
Then we'll ask our co-host to ask a question.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neha Badbotra, and I'm also from a rural area, and I have also faced so many problems during pandemic. But thankful to the staff and principal sir, to you also, because of the recording sessions. Because हमारे यहाँ पे क्या होता है, recordings जो है वो day to day daily update की जाती हैं. उसकी वजह से हमने lecture सुन के हमारा जो काम है वो हो जाता है. तो ये thankful हम अपने staff के लिए कि recordings को update करते रहते हैं. Thank you.
So that is again one way of supplementing your teaching. If you are not able to attend a live class, then you are able to see that recorded class. You will not lose out on the material that has been taught. The only thing that you will miss is the chance of interacting with the teacher and asking questions. So now, if you want to say something.
Sir, I would just like to say that post COVID, before COVID came, everything was perfectly okay. We were coming to college, interacting with our friends, and practicing the normal college. Suddenly, when this COVID came, what struck was our face-to-face interactions. But seeing our college ability and readiness for adoption, firstly, because of the Google classes, we were able to see the lectures that was virtual but sort of face-to-face, because the way teachers were questioning in between, so our attentiveness was being captured. And as some of people from the rural areas have said that they face this problem of connectivity. We are thankful that we have the recordings, as we had just said. So we were able to recapitulate and come to know whatever had gone. One thing which I noticed is, see, as a technical person has said, there is a technical aspect. You can change the numbers and you can evaluate a person. What about the teacher? We nurtured as teachers. It's not just the knowledge we possess, it's also the personality which is being sharpened and which is being cut and polished in our institute. So what I have found very impressive, because I have not done here from here, I am pursuing MA here. So what I found really impressive here was the way teachers knew the students. Before the COVID had started, they knew the personality of the student, and during these open book examinations, the way we have answered, and the questions were not straight away. We had to think and answer. So they were a reflection of our personality. So that was really something good. And I think open book made us do a lot of research and give out our best. Thereafter, the internships we had. So it was more than in a normal session. In the virtual, we had to be more precise and focused because we were being evaluated. So I don't think as a student or as a teacher, yes, we did have problems of connectivity, but then everything was catered to. And I believe being this becoming a digital world now, it's going to be digital everything. So we have to accept it. And I think being technically more smart is the need of the hour. So that way we can always prosper. I'm thankful to the institute for such a good class of art education as well as personality development.
Thank you. If any of the online participants would like to share their views with us. Any of the online participants?